Today I'm delighted to be interviewing Cate Crombie, Australia's leading non-violent communications specialist. Today, Cate's going to take us through the non-violent communication framework and give us practical tips and skills in how to apply it in your everyday life. I hope you get as much out of this interview as I have in working with Cate to bring it to you. Enjoy. Welcome everybody. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy day to join us. We promise you'll step away with techniques you can apply straight away. It appears most of us are hungry for skills to improve the quality of our workplace communications. Unfortunately, more common than not, our prevailing culture has taught us to think and speak in ways that can actually perpetuate conflict. Nonviolent communication, a language of life, partners practical communication skills and emotional literacy skills with powerful consciousness and vocabulary to help you create new outcomes. I am delighted to welcome Cate Crombie as Australia's leading nonviolent communication specialist. Welcome, Cate.
Tess, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here and to share my experience of taking NVC into a variety of workplace settings.
Well, I'm delighted to have you share your wisdom with our clients. Today, Cate and I would like to step you through Today, Cate and I would like to step you through how to shift dysfunctional exchanges into outcome-focused workplace communications, new ways to create listening environments, and the three most common communication hijacks. Well, actually, I think I'm going to take you through four, and how nonviolent communication can help you create these outcomes. But first, let me introduce you to Cate properly. Cate Crombie is an internationally accredited trainer, assessor with the International Centre of Nonviolent Communication based in the USA. She is currently the Centre of Nonviolent Communications Board Secretary. She facilitates nonviolent communication workshops and sessions in a variety of settings, including corporate organisations, community centres, and with private clients. She is well known in audiences around Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, and the US. She's a keynote speaker for the International Brain Gym Conference, numerous Montessori conferences in Australia and the US, and many other conferences. As a dedicated educator and believer in the power of nonviolent communication, she believes it can change lives. Cate was thrilled to be invited by Education Queensland to bring nonviolent communication into 110 state schools. I personally first learned of Cate via my ex-husband, who attended a presentation she did at the Queensland Law Society. He came home and said I'd be really interested in her presentation, and he was right. Cate has delivered workshops for audiences diverse as underground miners, executives, lawyers, teachers, parents, and many more. So welcome, Cate. We're thrilled to have you on board. Before we get into the practical techniques of NVC, can you tell us a little bit about how it got started?
Yes, I'd love to. Nonviolent communication was created by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, a clinical psychologist. And Marshall, as a young person, grew up in the turbulent Detroit neighborhood. And as a result, he developed a keen interest in forms of communication that would provide peaceful alternatives to the violence that he encountered. And he studied under Carl Rogers, the father of active or effective listening. And I guess what Marshall brings for me is incredible insight and practical skills, and these are very powerful tools. Marshall also established a not-for-profit centre in the 1980s in the US, and that's the organisation that I'm on the international board. And Marshall's work was inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King and Gandhi, and hence that's where the name nonviolent communication originated. And as it's evolved, it's very much become a needs-based and empathy-based communication process. And of course, empathy, like many of you, I am imagining, is a word that we're hearing more and more in politics and organisational settings. I guess to put things very simply, Marshall would say, you know, all people are ever saying is please and thank you in all communication. They're saying, please, would you meet my needs, or thank you for meeting my needs.
Cate, I know you have been teaching communication skills for a long time now. How is nonviolent communication different?
Well, yeah, that's true. I have been teaching and coaching in communication skills for well over 25 years. And for a long time, I was teaching standard I messages or I statements accompanied by active or reflective listening. And that was helpful in, you know, the workplaces and families and other settings that people are in. However, when I first encountered nonviolent communication about 15 years ago, it totally revolutionised my awareness and skill with communication. Indeed, it radically changed my training that I do because it is needs-based and it is designed to assist people to constructively communicate about their needs.
Kate, I've just had a message. Someone said that the screen isn't showing properly, so I'm just going to check that.
Yeah, I'm not able to see it either, Tess.
Okay, let's get this.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Wendy, for pointing that out to us. So we're back on track. Kate, back to how it's radically changed your training. Likewise, it's changed the way I work with my clients as well. Needs-based communication cuts through the noise and gets to the core of conversation. In turn, conversations become constructive very quickly, even with differing views in the room. Kate, I understand you're trained personally by Marshall Rosenberg. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I'm very fortunate to have been trained by him, both in places as far away as Argentina and South America, and in North America, of course. And in 2004, I was part of a team that brought him to Australia, where we spent 10 days in retreat with him and other international trainers. And following that, you know, this has really become my life's passion, to share this powerful and profound way of being in the world. And, you know, Gandhi's quote often comes to mind, you know, he inspired Dr. Rosenberg that, you know, be the change you want to see in the world. And I guess that's what it's about for me.
It would have been an amazing opportunity to spend 10 days with Marshall, and then, of course, the other time that you spent with him in different workshops. I'm sure this is something you would treasure with you forever, and especially with his passing last year.
Yeah, I'm so glad, so grateful to have had the opportunity to train with him before he passed away last year.
So can you tell us a little bit? Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about NVC?
Yes, NVC is often referred to as compassionate or collaborative communication. And before I set up any panic here, it's also about having a clear structure or framework that supports us in having high emotional intelligence. And we're going to take you through that shortly. And I have seen a huge range of organisations applying NVC, including the coal mining industry for leadership development for underground miners who are stepping up into a leadership role within their teams. Currently, I'm doing a lot of work with a large church organisation, and also have worked with medical and dental practices. You know, for their staff development and communication. Schools are one of my, you know, real passions to bring this into schools. not-for-profit NGOs and the social services sector. Psychologists and social workers are very excited when they discover NVC. And of course, with the work that you do, Tess, it's also very much applied around the world in conflict resolution and mediation. So it really is a transformational process that has been applied in many of the organisations that I've worked with. And Tess, I'm really delighted that you found NVC to be so valuable in your work as well.
It's been incredibly valuable, and it really has changed the way I work, especially in my mediation practice. However, I'm hearing that it's changing many people's day-to-day communications, executive communication, team communication. It's becoming more and more common. And I was interested when we were talking about doing this webinar, and you were telling me that Microsoft and Google's executive all are expected to be fluent in NVC and to use it. And it's such a powerful tool, it doesn't surprise me.
Yes, yes, it is. And today what we'll be doing is sharing a small slice of a much bigger process. What we want to share with you is the basic elements of the NVC process, and there are 4 key elements. And the first in itself is incredibly powerful, and that is to be able to make factual observations about what people are doing versus what we commonly do is making judgments or interpretations of their behaviour. That's already, we're wanting to factually look at what's happening like a movie camera would film actions and words that are spoken. So picking up on dialogue, that's a very, very important aspect of this process. And then we're wanting to connect with our own literacy or developing an emotional intelligence of feelings, which is often spoken about as being desirable. And how NVC takes emotional intelligence even further is that it links it with universal human needs. And that's one of the most significant differences of this process. And once we identify needs, we're wanting to then define specific strategies to meet needs. And we do that in the form of making requests. So using the framework, it is a very clear structure that guides you in the language that you use, indeed in the thoughts that we have, the thinking that we have. And by stepping through these 4 elements, they can combine to shift interactions, definitely from challenging exchanges to connected and collaborative conversations. So it provides a very elegant structure and does revolutionise conversations and the outcomes.
I agree with you, Kate. It often, to me, is what I call a conversation shaper. When people are struggling to constructively communicate, when emotions and their reactions are getting in the way, I step them through the NVC framework. And interestingly enough, there's often a really strong sense of relief when they see the framework to assist them with their words and the sentences that they need to be able to go through this conversation. One of the things I might add with this particular slide you can see at the moment is in the corporate world, I tend to use the word impact rather than feelings. It's a little bit more receptive with our clients. So, Kate,
yes, I agree that I often might use a feeling word, but not use the word feelings. And I love your approach of identifying it as the impact. So we're going to kind of pop back to the observation now.
Absolutely.
And the first step in this process is to identify, what is the observation? What is the stimulus for what we're feeling? And we want to identify specific facts, undeniable facts that we can agree on, and rather than the evaluation assumptions or theories that we have about people, sometimes the analysis or diagnosis that we layer on top of the observation or instead of the observation.
So in the example on the screen, I was deliberately left off the email or I found out that I was not included in the email distribution. What would you call the observation, Kate?
So I would definitely go for B, because A infers that somebody has done something on purpose and is far less likely to elicit a positive response. And so B is really factually identifying what was happening, what has happened. I found out that I wasn't included in the email distribution, rather than, especially the word deliberately is such a trigger word. There's a lot more power in identifying specifically what's happened. And it also helps us internally, as well as being something someone could respond to.
So a little bit more, Kate, on observation.
Yep, so the judgments are really too easy to do, and they definitely have serious pitfalls. So we want to not so much avoid them, because they can often tell us what our needs are. But what we often do, especially when we are triggered by somebody else's behaviour that we're not happy with, we have a tendency to be quick to judge or evaluate and make assumptions about their motivation. So that's not only negative judgments, but positive ones, surprisingly enough. So, Tess, if I said to you, you're the smartest person in this company, that might stroke your ego, but it would be much more helpful. It would be much more helpful feedback if I translated it to what's actually happened, to identify that for you and to say, wow, you found a solution to that problem that we haven't been able to find for weeks. And I'm just wondering, Tess, how would that be for you to hear?
Oh, I would have a massive ego boost, and I've got a healthy ego. It doesn't need any more boosting for that. But the feedback, when you can be really precise, is far more constructive.
Yes. Yeah. Just recently, I was doing some work in a school, and the school principal, after a mediation session, said, she wished that everyone could speak in terms of observations. She imagined that there'd be far less conflict. And I agree with her that even that in itself can already help to create some common ground and let us get clear about what's actually happened. And that alone can influence a change in behaviour, definitely. And just recently, someone said to me, my child is being bullied, and it took a few minutes and a bit of prompting for her to respond to my question, what exactly is happening to him? And finally, she said something simple like, he's being hit and kicked. And it was almost like I could see the big aha, the light bulb came on for her, and she said, wow, she could see immediately that it was so much more powerful and clearer and more likely to be heard by the school in particular, and perhaps the other parents, when framed in that way.
It makes it so much clearer. And to me, often this first step, the observation step, on its own can actually reduce or resolve conflict, or in the case of the situation that you just described, improve comprehension.
Yes. Yeah. So that is very, very helpful. So we're going to move, once we've identified the observation, now we're going to the second element, which is to identify, even if we do this internally, identify our feelings or the impact on us. And I like, Tess, your use of the word impact, because I do think it is a better fit in business or corporate world, perhaps, than feelings. And
So looking at this question now, Kate, what is the impact? I was pissed off and angry. It may well be the case you were pissed off and angry, but or I was embarrassed talking to the client as I was not aware of where the team was on this project. What's your comments there, Kate?
Yeah, well, I'm guessing people are already identifying B, because the language there is far more supportive of being heard. pissed off and angry. Well, that might be good to have a bit of an outlet, but not necessarily to the person, but to drop down underneath that often we're making judgments and we're not quite so capable of identifying what the underlying feeling is. And in this case, it could be that I was embarrassed because when I spoke to my client, I didn't have that information, that up-to-date information. So definitely B is going to be much more constructive.
Definitely B. Would you like to go on a little bit more, Kate?
Yeah, so what this is bringing up for me is that, that how NVC does take emotional intelligence that one step further. So yes, feelings are very much a part of us, about emotional intelligence. It's about our own self-awareness, and from our own self-awareness we start to grow a capacity to be aware of other people's feelings. And, for example, if you see your workmate kind of light up about something, you can check in. Well, what is that telling you? And, we can bring curiosity. Maybe he or she is excited about a new breakthrough, and we could acknowledge that, or passionate or interested in something that's happening. And likewise, if I see someone, in a meeting is kind of checking out, not fully present, what does that mean? Perhaps they're feeling overwhelmed or bored or worried. So, we can bring our own compassion, and I love curiosity, kind of, this wanting to understand what's happening. And to be able to develop our feelings list, because often we have a few feelings, glad, bad, sad, bad, mad, and we want to be able to develop a much more of a literacy of our feelings. And on the cnbc.org website, there are free feelings lists to download, and it's a great tool to be able to grow that literacy. And the other thing that I really like, as I say, is this using the feeling as a link to what the needs might be. So, feeling a confusion, I can go, wow, so do I have a need for clarity or clarification, more information, or understanding what's happening? Likewise, with if I'm feeling worried or concerned, then for sure there's going to be some need there for assurance or maybe predictability, safety or security. So, and again, overwhelmed will draw my attention to this need for perhaps support or ease in some way. So just kind of going back to your word impact, Tess, a tip that I often recommend in workplaces is not to use the actual word feeling, or with teenagers for that matter, is the feedback that I've had. So I might say something like, are you concerned, for example, and wanting assurance rather than I feel concerned. So yeah, that's just some,
It's a really, really good point there. And I think the thing that some of my clients take away with when we start discussing impact and feeling, and initially I get them focusing on the impact, there's an element about being able to express the impact or the feeling, depending what you're more comfortable with, that's authentically yours. And while somebody else might hold a different view to it, it is actually the impact that's occurred to you, or it's how you're feeling about the particular situation. And you own that. They cannot take that away from you. So that it brings to the conversation a genuine sense of authenticity. And when you combine that with the next step, which we're about to take you through, it becomes very powerful. It doesn't matter if they have a different view. This is what's your view, and this is what's your experience, and the impact on you.
Yes, definitely. It is really about tapping into your own authenticity and what is real for you. And there's huge amount of empowerment in that, even if you don't verbally share the feelings. It just somehow, that in itself brings some sense of relief.
It does. So now we move on to the third key element of nonviolent communication, which is your needs.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that people again will see that that B is really identifying, even though the word need is used in both of those examples, the word need in B is really pointing to a need of awareness of what's happening, to have information, to be able to be kept up to date. Whereas A contains a hidden should to me. They should be doing their job properly, not taking any shortcuts. But it's so it implies a judgment, and it's not clear. It's almost bordering on a strategy, but B is definitely the one that has a lot more clarity.
We'll talk about strategies in a moment, but this slide is pretty much an identical conversation to what I had with a client this morning, and he was wanting the other person to do blah blah blah, but he was not. And when we were talking about what he needed to be aware of, what his needs were, it was like, yeah, I know, but they just need to do their job. And it's like, and I hadn't written this this particular slide at that. I hadn't written that question until this morning, but it was, yep, that's the question. So he'll laugh if he's on this call. I don't think he is, but anyway. So it's very, very common and easy to focus on what the other person needs to do rather than be aware of what your needs are.
Yes, yeah. We're often projecting onto other people what they should or shouldn't be doing, and to bring it back to understanding what needs are on the table. I think first of all, maybe to identify that in this process, that we recognise that needs are universal to all human beings. No matter where we're located, here in Australia or somewhere else on the planet, like Africa or the Siberian steppes, needs apply. Different needs may be up at different times. The other point that NDC makes is that needs actually stand alone, that they don't include any personal action, and there's a very important reason for that. First of all, let's have a look at some examples of what needs look like. And
again, needs are like your authentic truth. They're your needs. They come from a very genuine place within you.
Yeah, and bring a lot of, needs are motivators for every action that we take, every step that we step, everything that we say. Where everything that we do, we're doing in order to meet a need, and I think that's a really key point. And here are some needs that that we might be experiencing, and what I've noticed is in my work, and Tess and I, you and I have had a conversation about this, that the need to be really heard stands out for most of us. And I'm remembering a survey that an NBC colleague of mine conducted in workplaces where she identified the need for genuine acknowledgement and recognition was so important, and that came up top of the list, more important than money. I guess money could be a way of us experiencing acknowledgement and appreciation. However, it doesn't quite cut it in terms of this survey that she did. And again, this process is about developing a feelings and a needs literacy. And we can access this either from cnbc.org or my website, metacommunicate.com. And there are also some smartphone apps, I'm sure you'll be delighted to hear, and little wallet cards that you can purchase that scaffold us through while growing this literacy. And one person actually shared with me once that he wished he could have feelings and needs tattooed on his eyelids for ease of access. So it's kind of amusing.
It is.
And a strategy that he was imagining might work for him.
So, and needs then become, they're powerful in their own right, and then when we combine them with the fourth element, which is request, it becomes incredibly powerful. So looking at this,
Yes.
Kate, which one do you think is going to be the NVC response?
Okay. A is quite vague. I mean, when do I want to be kept informed, and what do I want to know? What else is in play? So it's more of a wish than an actual, concrete request. And so, it doesn't cut the mustard, I'm afraid. Whereas, the request about, can we catch up on Friday to go over the progress to date and, the information, I'm meeting a client on Monday. I want to be able to move forward as best I can. Could I receive a copy of your weekly report? So it's far more specific and far clearer, and it gives people a chance to know what it is, concretely what I'm looking for.
And you've just used a word that is a very important word to request, being specific, but there's a number of elements that are extremely important for requests. Could you take us through those, please, Kate?
Yes. So there's one crucial distinction that NVC makes, that requests are not a demand. There's no implied threat or, that there may be some, physical or emotional harm done. And they have four elements that are absolutely important. And the first one is that whatever it is I'm asking the person, requesting them to do, it does need to be something that is doable. And it needs to be a specific action that they can do, and expressed in the positive. It's much easier for people to do a do want rather than a don't want, so that we're letting them know what it is that would meet our needs. And as much as possible, we want to express it in the present tense. We find that people are much more likely to agree to something that's bound in that time frame.
So one of the things that I find interesting working with clients with NVC as a part of their communication toolkit is they'll often get to step 3 and they've gone, okay, step 1, 2, 3 with observation, impact, needs, and then they sort of sit back and, well, it's bloody obvious what I need. They should know what I don't need to ask. They're expecting the other person to have a crystal ball. So it's very tempting to forget this step, or potentially sometimes people feel very uncomfortable asking. And it's a matter of sitting down and working out what you want to ask for and how you're going to ask for it. But it's important not to forget this step, otherwise you're going to end up being unhappy with the outcome that you get.
Yes, I agree. I notice when I work with people, particularly in intimate relationships, that they often expect their partner to be clairvoyant and not, and know what would meet their need without them knowing. So, a very important step to be able to be specific about what it is that we would want to have happen.
So bringing this all together, and while we've been talking in very formal sentence structures at the moment, once you've shaped that for yourself, it's important to find it in and express it in your language. And the situation we've taken through you in the 4 steps could end up looking like this. Hey, I was talking to the client the other day, and I was a little embarrassed as I was not across your team's progress on this project. It appears I'm not on your weekly progress report email distribution. I need to be aware of the team's progress and interactions with the client. Can we catch up on Friday to go through the progress to date? I'm meeting the client on Monday. Moving forward, can I receive a copy of your progress report? It could look very differently when you start a conversation. Hey, you deliberately left me off that email distribution list. How far do you think you would have got with that conversation? So bringing the elements together becomes a very powerful, it sets the tone, it sets the path forward. So you've got your observation, you've got your impact, you've got your needs, and you've got your request. Having done all of that, you can still be in conflict, and often conflict sits at a strategy level. And Kate's going to take us through how some of these conflict strategies can exist.
Yeah, happy to. It's, most conflict occurs at the level of strategy. And I was thinking about a situation, just as an example, of working with a manager on a building site, a construction manager, who was having a challenge with one of his labourers, who was somebody who was from New Zealand, actually, and the manager noticed that this worker was putting tools like spades, shovels, and some other tools behind the tool shed rather than back in the tool shed. And so he was starting to have some stories going on about, that perhaps he was going to try to steal them, or, sort of really concerned that this was happening. And after we did some work on this and we identified, okay, so he's putting the tools behind the tool shed, and the manager was feeling concerned and really wanting some clarity about what was happening, and he decided to invite him to have a beer over lunch, which was a little bit more informal. And after doing this work, he said he noticed that he was able to bring more care and compassion, because he was aware that this man was here alone in Australia and family was back in New Zealand. And he addressed this with him, and the guy said that he was really wanting to be sure that he'd be able to have the tools to be able to do the job. And so he was meeting his need for, some sense of security and predictability, but his strategy for meeting his need was definitely in conflict with the building site manager's need for, reassurance that tools are going to be there when they were needed, and for everybody to have access to them. So it was a great example of how we often choose a strategy that then means that, that strategy is in conflict. And what we need to do is drop down beneath the waterline and to find out what the needs are, because the needs are underlying drivers for every action we take. And when we get the kind of connection that he was able to make with this man, then we can find solutions. And that's what, yeah.
And sometimes what you find is really, really quite surprising. And I have a personal story. I was getting really surprised at home. I very much like to have the bed made and tidy every morning, and we sort of had this unspoken rule that whoever gets up last has to make the bed. Anyway, some mornings I was walking back into the bedroom and half the bed was made and the other half wasn't. And the half that was made was actually my husband's half, not my half. And I'm like going, I thought, I'll just leave it. And finally I was starting to get annoyed with it. And some days it was and some days it wasn't. Anyway, so I finally said to him, hey, what's with half the bed being made? And he goes, oh, no, it's really simple. I get up in the morning and I make my half. And then after I get dressed and go and put my shoes on, he would walk around to the other side of the bed and sit down and put his shoes on the other side of the bed, and then make the other side of the bed. And it was just a matter of timing. And when he was actually in that location, it was like, oh, okay. So instead of me reacting and getting the shits with him going, why aren't you making the bed, or my side of the bed? And I was really surprised, but it was very, very logical. So, but
yeah, that really highlights, Tess, that sometimes the need is autonomy or choice about when we do things and how we do them.
Absolutely. In a workplace, bringing it back to the workplace, we have many contributing factors to conflict, and the point that you've made there, Kate, is one of them. Sometimes we very much have these preconceived ideas of how it should be done, and we might have competing deadlines, we might have limited resources, we might have vague briefs, and all of these things can create strategy conflict. if you talk people through the NVC, with using the NVC language, you can keep it as a very constructive conversation. And here's an example. So imagine you've got a new deadline or a new piece of work thrown in. So we're turning the MVC structure around. We're making it a set of questions, but we're hitting off on the four key elements. With this new deadline, how does it impact on your overall team? What do you need to get through this? How do you propose we can make this happen? And so you've got the fact, you've got the impact, you've got the needs, and you've got the request. So you may not use the sentence structure, and hopefully you don't use the sentence structure in a really formal sense. You use that to shape your thinking, but then you can put it into more informal conversation. Or you might use a question structure. You might be getting your head around the structure for yourself. However, you might need to guide other people through this structure and take them on the journey with you through the questions. Great way to handle conflict. So,
and avoid power struggles too.
Absolutely.
When we're in a power struggle over the strategy, if we can bring everything back to what the needs are, then we have a much better chance of finding solutions.
So, Kate's got a couple of examples for us.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about this and remembering a nurse that I was doing some work with who had a challenge with a co-worker on night duty where they shared a desk and they were both using, and she went away and decided to apply this sentence structure to her co-worker. And unfortunately, what she did say, I think she was already had those judgmental thoughts still in her mind, and she said to her co-worker, "When I see the mess on the desk," already, getting a reaction. So even from that point on, I'm not sure how much her co-worker heard, expressing her feelings of frustration and need for consideration for her use of the space and her request to put the files and magazines away. And when she came back and she said, "This stuff doesn't work," and when we got really clear on what had happened, and she actually modified her observation and went back to her co-worker and said, "I'd just like to have another go at that. It wasn't quite the way I wanted to express myself," which is something we can do a bit of repair work. And she said, "When I see the files and magazines on our shared desk and there's nowhere for me to work, I'm frustrated and would really like space and consideration for how that is for me. And how would it be for you to clear the desk of the files as soon as you're finished and take the magazines away after the break?" And she got a yes, that, and the connection between them, or the relationship, was mended. So that was a lovely outcome. And just being very aware that her thoughts were she's messy and inconsiderate, versus the facts were she's leaving files and magazines on the desk.
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to see it for yourself, so running it by somebody is also very helpful.
Yes, yeah, and I guess it is, and that's one of the benefits of having some coaching, and I find that I'm far more objective with other people's challenges, perhaps, than even my own sometimes.
I hear you.
You find that too, Tess?
Absolutely. Sometimes I don't even you get so used to some of your own language or some of your own words that it's kind of autopilot. So asking a co-worker or asking a friend, "Hey, how do you think this would go? Am I expressing myself clearly?" is very helpful. Sometimes when I've asked someone and they've pointed it out to me, like, you could knock me over with a feather, I'm going, "Oh my God, how could I not see that?"
It's so obvious often, and I've been very fortunate in my life because I have three now young adult daughters who taught me these lessons many years ago. And I can remember one of the first ones was when I said, "When I hear the noise on the radio," of course, what was noise to me was music to them, and I'd lost connection immediately because they were hearing the judgment in my words, and it impacts on your tone of voice as well. And I found I had, they gave me feedback. I found I had much better results when I changed to something like, when I hear the radio on at that volume and right now I'm needing some quiet and rest, my non-judgmental description of the behaviour or the situation and the inclusion of my needs certainly achieved a willingness to change behaviour to meet my need.
I really like that example, Kate, and it's so easy to slip that judgment in there.
Yeah, without us, it's just so unconscious, as you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
And so, great to perhaps get somebody else to have a look at an email that we might be writing, or if we're working on this, doing the work before we express something to someone is a great idea.
Yeah.
But, I can recall working with a client who was a manager in a very large counselling service, national counselling service, and she was the immediate supervisor of one of the counsellors who was had been arriving after the official start time for 2 or 3 days each week, and this had been happening for some weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, perhaps a month. And she said that her previous thinking would have been something like, he doesn't care about his work or the impact on his colleagues. And she was considering following the 3 warnings guideline. And then she decided instead to address this with him using NVC. And so she expressed honestly to him, what she was observing, when she had seen that he was arriving and how long it had been happening and how she was feeling about that. And she identified that her needs, once we did some work on it, that they were really to have an understanding of what was happening for him. So she shared that with him and said, would you tell me what is happening for you? And to her surprise, he shared that his wife has cancer and he was taking her to her chemotherapy appointments and other medical appointments. And I guess the sad part is that even though he was working in a counselling environment, he hadn't told anybody about his wife's serious illness. And my client and her worker worked out together that he would sleep on a decision overnight as to what he might do. And the next day, there could have been a different outcome, but this is what happened. He actually chose to resign, and I guess that, was in alignment with his needs to support his wife and also maintain his personal dignity and his own integrity. So he shared that it was a huge relief to him to have been able to discuss it and be heard too.
That's a very interesting example there, Kate. It's the client, probably having been in a situation where I've nursed somebody through cancer, I know you feel torn because from my perspective, I was feeling very torn between where I could put my attention. So if putting myself in that situation, I would imagine I would have a sense of relief having resigned from work, not feeling like I'm not doing a proper job.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that is something that really was present for him, that he was progressively feeling worse and worse about himself, which wasn't helping the situation at all, especially in his role as a counsellor.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. So we promised you we would take you through how nonviolent communication shifts dysfunctional exchanges into outcome-focused workplace discussions. And it does that by shifting from accusations and assumptions to being very clear about what is an observation and discussions based on impacts and needs. We also said we'd talk to you about how it creates listening environments. If one person feels as though that their needs are listened to, they are more likely to listen to the needs of the other person. And there's a chance... Yeah. Sorry, Kate?
Sorry, I was just remembering Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think habit number 3 was, before you will be understood, first seek to understand. And
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. Thank you.
And
Fine.
you may want to use that questioning style with the MVC as a framework to pull out the information from them, help them discover what their needs are, and then you may be able to work with them on how you can help them with those needs, and then you might be able to share your needs as well. I talked at the beginning about communication hijacks. I did say we'd talk about 3, but I'm going to talk about 4. In my experience as a communication coach, there are a number of key hijacks, and one of the most powerful ones is people walk into a conversation assuming they know the answer. So that takes away any formal chance of discovery, any chance of understanding what's important to the other person, what their needs are, and being able to work together for a solution. Applying NVC can take away that because there's no room in the conversation for a solution. Judgment is one of the fastest ways to shut down a conversation, and by taking yourself through the structure of MVC, you can pare back your judgment. It may still be sitting there. We're human, and we sort of, it's very easy to go there and think that or connect to that experience. But you don't necessarily need to put it in your words. And over time, you might start to change some of your thinking about it. I just talked about listening. Not listening is another really, really fast way of shutting down a conversation. And as I said earlier, if you don't ask for what you want, your meeting or your conversation is a really big waste of time because you're not going to get anything like what you hope to get if you miss this really important step out. And so for me, they're the key communication hijacks. Kate, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, a couple of things that pop up for me is with presupposing a solution is that I've noticed when people get really stuck is that they are attached to a particular solution or a particular action or a particular person taking that action. And if we can kind of free ourselves up and focus on the need and open up to other, creatively exploring other solutions, I think that's really helpful. And asking precisely for what you want can be something as simple as, could we explore possible solutions to this? So that could be the request.
Absolutely.
Could we take half an hour to explore ways in which we could meet this need or solve this problem? And that, of course, requires listening. Yeah.
And Kate and I were talking earlier, and we both are a big fan of Bill Eddy, who some of you on the line will be familiar with because, I'm a big fan. But we also like in this step using an expression he is a big fan of, and it's what do you propose? And that can open up the conversation to let it all flow. And so that could be your request.
Yes, exactly. So it's kind of opening things up where we are partnering together. We're opening up the conversation for collaboration, and people are far more likely to be willing to follow through on solutions or strategies when they've been part of coming up with the solution.
Absolutely.
So that's another, yeah.
We would like to emphasize that it can be a little bit challenging when you first start to work with this structure because you're having to sort of slow down your thinking and you're having to check in with yourself. And so we decided that we'd like to share just a little bit of tips getting started. So I'm going to hand over to Kate and she can talk through some of her tips on how she gets started.
Yes, thanks, Tess. One of my major suggestions is that a great way to start is with our own self-awareness and self-connection, or what we often refer to in NVC as self-empathy. And, just to apply those 4 elements to myself, to check in with, what is it that I'm reacting to, and kind of let go of those judgments about what the other person should or shouldn't be doing. And that what I, one example that I was thinking of was that I might be working with someone who I might be tempted to label as being manipulative. And then the challenge is for me to bring that back to me. What needs of mine are wanting to be seen and fulfilled? And instead of judging them as being manipulative and perhaps micromanaging me and seeing the things that they are doing wrong or ineffectively, I can take that back and be responsible for my own feelings and needs. And it starts to shift my thinking, it starts to shift my whole approach. Because if I get connected to, well, is this about trust or honesty or respect or freedom of choice? Perhaps it's about freedom from being controlled and wanting equity and partnership. I can get really clear on that. And so I can draw on this kind of self-connection and this kind of awareness, then I have a much better chance of being self-empowered and also working constructively with them. I also have a better chance of getting what I would like when, when I also add, some requests for strategies that will meet my needs. I can be clear about that. So, what are my needs? How is it impacting on me? And what would I like to have happen? And then once I'm practiced at using this internally, then I can start to apply the same principles to others. And that's that's really the key, especially if we're a little nervous about changing our communication style in a workplace setting. Then we can do this, what a colleague of mine actually calls, sneaky NVC. So we're starting by applying it to ourselves. And Tess, what about you? What techniques do you have when you're introducing clients to NVC? I'd love to hear them.
I have a series of questions I often take them through, and a conversation could look or sound like this. So how different is this other person to you? Oh, heaps. How different are their views to yours? Oh, like you would not believe. Do they approach problem solving like you do? No way. I don't know what they're thinking. So what are the chances they're going to have the same logic as you? Oh, Buckley's a none. Do you need to try a new way of communicating with them? Oh, I guess. There's a little bit of reluctance there, but they start to see that pushing their view or their explanation or their logic is not going to get them anywhere. So my number one rule is typically always about logic. Just forget about it. And once that penny drops for you, then the magic can begin. You can allow the conversation to start to unpack for you. What is the observation? What are your feelings? What's your impact? And then it just flows. It starts to flow. So that's my big one tip. Forget about logic. So we have come to the end of time, and we actually, as always, like to start on time and finish on time. Cate, I know you've got some links that we can send out to people, and we can suggest some apps if they want for different reasons. Do you have any closing comments that you would like to make?
One that just occurred to me was using the 4 key elements. A manager, when I was doing some work in Singapore, his comment was that what seemed like an insurmountable amorphous mass of challenges were broken down into individual steps and individual specific things that he could address. So that's what popped up for me there. There's the benefit of really clearly identifying what is it that's happening and the other 3 steps. That's my, thank you.
I like that. Well, thank you, Cate. Thank you for taking your time out of your day. Cate and I would love to hear from you guys, and in particular, let us know how you go with trying some of the techniques, and send us any success stories, and also do send us if you have any issues. We're happy just to sort of shoot some information back to you. So we'd like to wish you all the very, very best on your NVC journey. And may it become as powerful for you guys as it has been for us, and take a lot more stress out of your difficult conversations. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you, Tess.
Thank you, Cate.